Hi everyone, this is the online lecture for AD&AS. This is a more technical topic. You have to be sure of this because you need this for your projects for the next few topics, and this will be the main model that will be used and tested for the mid-sem test and also for the final paper. Now this is the AD&AS curve in a nutshell. Following this, we'll take a look at the individual curves of the AD, SRAS, and the LRAS that makes up this whole AD&AS diagram. Okay, now what each of them represent and what do they collectively represent as a diagrammatic form of understanding the economy. But before that, let's take a look at time periods. When we do diagram shiftings and changes, it's important that we have a grasp of the time period that we allow changes to happen. Let's take a look. Now, there's a segregation of time into long run and short run. Now, by the term of it, short run means a short period of time. Long run means a long period of time. Now, how short is short, how long is long? It can differ from chapter to chapter, but the overall understanding is for a short run is when the process, the change process is still occurring, but we take a halfway point to understand how are things changing or how have things changed at the halfway point. Okay, long run is when we allow the change to be completed, the whole process to be completed. All right, so the change process can differ from chapter to chapter, but this is roughly how we can understand it by. Okay, a short run is a short period of time whereby the change process has not completed. Okay, the event has not worked itself out. Okay, but a long period of time is when the event has been completed, the whole change process has been completed, then we take another measurement. Okay, so a short period of time and a long period of time. Okay, here we say that a short period of time is where factor prices cannot adjust fully. You will later on you'll see how what it means in this chapter and the following chapters. And long run is where a long period of time we allow the whole adjustment to take place where output goes back to potential output, all right, or potential GDP. Now let's take a look at the supply curves first. Your supply curves are divided into the long run aggregate supply curves and the short run aggregate supply curve. Okay, your long run aggregate supply basically shows you where is your potential, the production capability of the economy given how much resources that you have. Okay, it shows you in the long term, in the long run, what is the amount of GDP that your economy can potentially produce. Okay, so where's your potential is. This is based on how much resources you have. Your short run shows you your current production now as a relationship to the price level. Okay, so this shows you a more current kind of indicator, all right, production at this point of time, okay, as a relationship to the price level. Your long run aggregate supply shows you your potential, okay, over a long period of time. Now this is how your LRAS looks like on the diagram. Now let's take a look at this diagram. Your AD&AS diagram has on the y-axis the price level. Now we mentioned in the lecture that this is not measured in dollars and cents. This measures the changes in the price level. Okay, by this axis, we can know whether prices have gone up or come down, but we cannot tell whether exactly how much is a particular product because it's macro. We cannot tell per product kind of price level. We can tell changes to the general price level. Okay, so we understand that in the previous chapter we talked about GDP deflator, right? We measure changes in price level in the form of index. So now we look at changes in the price level in the form of diagram. Okay, now on this axis we measure real GDP. All right, now real GDP, the calculation, okay, if you remember your previous topic, income method is equals to output method is equals to expenditure method. So you can put here real GDP, we can put here real Y, which means real income. You can put here real output. Okay, all these are mathematically equal. All right, so you can put real Y, you can put real GDP. Now your LRAS is a vertical line that measures your potential. Okay, now your potential is here given by how much resources your economy has. So this real GDP is measured in dollars and cents, a particular currency, okay, of the country. So given how much resources or factors of production you have, your potential to produce goods and services in terms of value is here, okay. Now, your potential is not affected by the price level. If things become more expensive, you still have the same amount of people, your factors of production, you still have the same amount of people, you still have the same amount of land, you still have the same amount of capital. Okay, so your potential is unaffected by the price level. All right, it is determined at a certain point by how much resources you have. All right, so it's not affected by the price level. Okay. Now your SRAS is a different story. Your SRAS shows you a rising, upward sloping kind of curve. Okay, from left to right. Okay, it's upward sloping. Now your SRAS is the aggregate of all the supply of goods and services in the economy. All the producers, all right, the entire supply of in the whole economy is totaled up into this curve. Now why is it upward sloping? Now this reflects a kind of mindset of the seller. If the price is low, okay, follow the cursor. If the price is low, the quantity sold is very little. Okay, in terms of GDP, the quantity sold is very little. When the price level is high, the amount of quantity sold in terms of GDP is actually very high. Now this represents a form of mindset in which we call the law of supply, that sellers prefer to sell things that has a higher price so they can earn more. Okay, this is a common mindset. So they like to sell higher price products so that they earn more. So the quantity supplied will be higher. Now some of you may be thinking, well, not all sellers think like that. Now this law of supply is not the only law that is, but it covers the widest range of behavior. Okay, the most sellers think like that. There are some sellers, of course, that doesn't think like that. But this law of supply is the main one that we're using. So we make an assumption, generally, most sellers would prefer to sell things that has a higher price level. At a higher price level, they prefer to sell more. Okay, lower price, they're not so interested, they sell lesser. So that's why this curve is upward sloping, okay, reflecting this mindset and this mentality. Okay, now, when we talk about movement, observe here we talk about movement. A movement means that on this curve, we move from one point to the other. Now when we are on this same curve, the change, we call it a movement, okay, measured by a change in the quantity supplied by the producers. Now this represents the mindset and the behavior pattern of the sellers in general, okay. And a movement here is caused by a change in price level. When the value changes, observe the cursor, when the price level change from this point upwards, all right, the corresponding value on the SRAS curve also changes from point A to point B. So we call this a movement, an upward movement when there's an increase in price, okay, and vice versa. All right, so movement is caused by a change in the price level, and this reflects the mindset of the sellers in general. Okay. Now your long run and short run aggregate supply curves, your LRAS and SRAS, are not static curves. They will change. Okay, that means your potential can change. That means your suppliers can sell more or sell less. Okay, so what changes your long run and short run aggregate supply? Let's take a look. Now your LRAS, which measures your potential, can change based on these three following factors. How much labor you have. Okay, this labor is one of your factors of production, right? How much capital you have, okay, and the state of technology. Now, any increase in these factors will increase your potential. Now, take note, when LRAS shifts, SRAS shifts along with it, like what we have told you in lecture. Okay, let's take a look at the diagram. The diagram looks like this. When LRAS shifts, SRAS must shift together with it in the same direction. Now why? Let's take a look at an example. Let's say there's more labor. In this case, more labor in a particular economy. When there's more labor, you have more resources, so your potential will increase. Okay. Now Y is your national income. P is your potential. Okay. So when your LRAS shift to the right, okay, because there's more resources in terms of labor, your workers' salaries also becomes lower because there's more workers to choose from. When your wages are cheaper, you can produce more, your SRAS, your short run aggregate supply curve also shift to the right. Okay, so when LRAS shifts, SRAS shift together in the same direction. Why? It's because your potential usually affects your cost of production. Cost of production will shift your your short run supply curves. We will take a look at this in detail a bit later. Okay, so your potential will change your cost of production. All right, so in this case, when there's more labor, your potential increases. More labor meaning more workers for the companies or firms hiring workers to choose from, so the wages will drop. Wages drop, your cost of production drop, your SRAS shift to the right. Okay, just remember, whatever affects your LRAS, when you shift the curve, make sure you shift SRAS also together in the same direction. All right. Now let's take a look at your SRAS, your short run aggregate supply. Now when your SRAS shifts, it shifts alone. Okay, now what shifts your SRAS? Basically your cost of production. How much does it cost you to produce your goods and services? So basically these two things. The wage rate, because when you produce, usually you hire people, so you have to pay salary. So this is one of your costs. And other resource prices. Okay, other resource prices, other things that cost you to produce the goods and services. Okay, now so any changes to these two factors, okay, will change your cost of production and therefore your short run aggregate supply, your SRAS. Okay, now take note, when your cost of production rises, when it becomes more expensive to produce, you cannot produce as much as before because you can't afford it, your SRAS will fall, and vice versa. Okay, so your cost of production is inversely related to how much you can supply. When cost goes up, you produce less. When cost comes down, you can produce more. Okay? Remember, when SRAS shifts, it shifts on its own. Alright? When LRAS curve shifts, it shifts together with SRAS. But when SRAS curve shifts, it shifts on its own. So when you have a factor that causes SRAS to shift, your LRAS remain where it is. Okay, let's take a look at the diagram. Like this. Okay, so in this case, we can have an example. So when your cost of production goes up, let's say your labor cost goes up or electricity bills goes up because of crude oil prices going up. So when things become more expensive, your cost of production goes up. Your SRAS will shift to the left because you can't afford to produce so much as before. Your potential is unaffected. Okay, your potential is unaffected. So your potential remains where it is. All right. Now this means that your costs cannot affect your potential, but your potential can affect your cost. So that's why it's like a one-way relationship. So rounding up, please remember this. When you shift SRAS, you shift it on its own. When you shift LRAS, which is your potential, your SRAS will follow in the same direction. Okay, so please remember that. Let's take a look at AD, your aggregate demand. Now, so far we have looked at the supply curves of an economy. That means the production potential for LRAS and the current production for SRAS. Okay, in the typical economy. All right. Now, on the other side, we compare your supply curves with demand. Okay, the demand is the one for goods and services in an economy. Now, the formula is given by your C plus I plus G plus X minus M or NX. Okay, now this constitutes all the demand in an economy. Demand of goods and services by consumers, you and me. Demand for goods and services by private companies, investment in terms of investment. Demand for goods and services by the government. All right, and by overseas people for our goods and services. All right, now remember we still got the minus of imports because they are not made by us. All right, so this aggregate demand shows you all the demand for goods and services by different components in the economy. All right, the consumers, the private companies, and the government, as well as overseas people. All right. Now your AD curve on the diagram is a downward sloping curve from left to right. Now this reflect the demand mindset, whether it's from consumers, private companies, or government, or overseas people. Okay. Now when things are expensive, the price is high. Okay, higher. We are not so interested to buy. The quantity demanded is very low. Okay, when things are cheaper, okay, corresponding value on the AD curve, the quantity demanded is higher. All right, so this reflects the buying mindset. Okay, that expensive things we don't want so much, cheaper things we want more of it. Now again, it's not the only law of demand, but the most important one, which is why we are teaching you this. Okay, it reflects the most common buying behavior. All right, so that's why it's downward sloping. Again, make a distinction between a movement on the same curve. Okay, a movement on the curve is caused by a change in the price level. Okay, in this case higher. Okay, example higher. So this will be upward movement based on the corresponding values. All right, higher. So this is upward movement, and this is reflected by a drop, a fall in your real GDP demanded. Okay, so when price goes up, there's upward movement. You can see that the quantity demanded starts to fall. That means people don't want to buy so much because it's more expensive, and vice versa. Now your curve can shift, all right? That means people can demand more or less when the price don't change, okay, based on a few factors. Now typically this regards with your components of AD starting to change, all right? So any change in the components of AD, your C, your I, your G, your NX, okay, this will cause a shift of the AD curve. That means the price don't change, but people from any of these players, okay, they want more or less of goods and services. Now let's take a look at an example. In this case, there's an increase in consumption or investment or government expenditure or NX. Okay, this will cause the AD curve to shift to the right. Let's take a look at the diagram. Okay, the diagram will be like this. So the AD curve shift to the right. Now this means that when the price remains the same, people are more willing to demand for goods and services. Okay, and that could come from consumption C, all right, your investment I, your government G, export X minus M imports. Okay, so any of those components, all right, the plus components starting to go up, it will cause your curve to shift to the right. Okay, or your minus M becomes smaller, it will cause your curve to shift to the right. Okay, and vice versa. Now let's put all the three curves together and see what they tell us as a whole. Now when you draw the three lines together, it's good to draw the AD curve and the SRAS curve first. Okay, now let's recap. Your AD curve shows you all the demand for goods and services in the economy. Your SRAS shows you all the supply of goods and services in the economy at this point of time. Okay, and at the intersection point where they meet, okay, this will be where your equilibrium real GDP is. Okay, this is where the economy will produce, because this point is where your AD curve meets your SRAS. It means that buyers and sellers come into an agreement. All right. So this amount of real GDP will be how much the economy will produce, because that's the agreement point between all the buyers and all the sellers in the whole economy. All right. Now that will also yield the price level at PE. Okay. Now we won't know whether this output level is good or bad, or too high, too low, until we know where the potential is. Okay, so the status of this point, whether it's too high or too low or just nice, depends on where your potential is. That means where your LRAS is. And there's a few positions that's possible. Now, your macroeconomic equilibrium can occur at below full employment output, at full employment output, or above full employment output, depending on how we draw the LRAS. Let's take a look at the few possibilities. Now, when your economy produces less than your potential, you are at below full employment equilibrium. Okay, full employment is at LRAS, at your potential. So when you're producing less than that, you are below full employment output or equilibrium. Okay, now how much lesser you are producing compared to your potential is called a recessionary gap. The difference between your current production, which is lesser than potential output, and potential output, the difference is called a recessionary gap. Now, why recessionary gap? You remember in our last lecture that recession is not a good thing. That means the economy is producing lesser. Okay, so it's not a good time for the economy. So it must be a negative kind of a reason why the economy is producing less than your potential. So we call that a recessionary gap. All right. Now this the diagram, how we see it. Now when you draw the diagram, I mentioned in lecture, please draw the equilibrium first, AD and SRAS first, okay? Where the cursor is pointing, this is your current equilibrium, the meeting point between your aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply. Now this point again, it gives rise to your current output, your equilibrium output, all right, and the price level. So below full employment equilibrium, this point is below your potential. So potential, which is represented by LRAS, is on the right. Okay, is on the right. So potential is higher. Remember on the diagram, on the scale, this is 0, okay, and then increase. So LRAS, the potential is on the right side. So it's higher than your current production. So you are producing less than potential. The difference is called a recessionary gap. Okay, that means the economy is in recession. Now the economy could be producing at full employment at potential. So your equilibrium given by your aggregate demand, your AD curve and your SRAS curve is exactly where LRAS is. So all the three lines meet together at one point. Okay, so that means that the economy is currently producing at full employment or long run equilibrium, and it will remain that way until an event hits. So it looks like this on the diagram. All the lines meet together at one point. Your equilibrium is where your LRAS is. So this is your equilibrium output and is also where your potential or full employment output is. Okay, and this gives rise to a price level. Now you notice that when we label the points and the coordinates, we tend to use the same alphabet for the same coordinate. So now that we are at full employment output, this is YF. The price, the corresponding price, we call it PF. Okay, that's how we label things for easy recognition. You could also be producing at above full employment output. So that means all the three lines doesn't meet together. Your equilibrium given by AD and SRAS is now higher than potential output. How much higher? The difference is called inflationary gap. Okay, inflationary gap because when you produce at higher levels above your potential, that usually gives rise to inflationary pressure. That means it forces price to go up. Okay, we will talk about that in the next chapter. But the gap, okay, is called an inflationary gap. This is the gap between your potential and the output level, which is now higher than your potential output level, which is your LRAS. Let's take a look at the diagram. This is a diagram for above full employment equilibrium. Now you can see that your equilibrium is given by AD cuts SRAS at this point where the cursor is pointing, and that gives you a equilibrium output of YE and a price level of YE. Okay, price level and your output level is given by your equilibrium point. Equilibrium point is given by AD and SRAS meeting point. Yeah. Now at this output level, you can see that you're now on the right side of your potential. Okay, so you're now producing higher than your potential, which is measured by LRAS. So the gap between that means your higher production now and your potential is called an inflationary gap. Okay, now so far we have looked at three equilibrium levels, okay, using your AD&AS models. Now these are potential starting points for development later when we throw in events for you to shift the curves. So the events can require you to start from either of these three equilibrium levels. Could be below full employment output, could be at full employment output, could be above full employment output. So you must always read the question carefully. Let's take a look at two case studies following this. Now the first case study is when we have AD rising. Now if you remember what we mentioned earlier, AD consists of CGIXM, okay, all these components. Now CGIX, your consumption, government expenditure, investment levels and exports are plus items. So when they go up, AD rises. Imports, M is a minus component. Okay, if it falls, AD becomes larger. Okay, because it's a minus component, it becomes smaller, AD will rise. How does a diagram like that look like? Now we assume the starting point to be full employment output. That means all the lines meet together on the diagram. Let's take a look. So we have full employment output here. Okay, if you remember, all the lines meet together at one point. So we are now producing where our potential lies. Okay. Now, so when your AD rises, your AD curve shifts to the right from AD to AD1. Okay, we mentioned in the previous slide that AD curve is shifting to the right, or AD is rising because your CIGX components are increasing, or your minus M component is falling. Okay, so AD rises, so your AD curve shifts to the right. Now you can see that your equilibrium point was here, and after the shift, your equilibrium point is now here. Now at the new equilibrium point, your three lines don't meet together anymore. Okay, just your equilibrium point is there. Your AD cuts SRAS is there. Okay, so that gives rise to a coordinate. Our current production is now at Y1, and the price level correspondingly is P1. Okay, we are now producing higher than our potential because AD has gone up. So potential was here, is here, and now we are producing at Y1. Okay, so the gap is called an inflationary gap. Whenever you produce more than your potential, the gap is called inflationary gap because it tends to give rise to inflation when you're overproducing. Okay, like I mentioned earlier, we will touch more about this inflation in the next chapter. Okay, let's take a look at another example. Now, in this example, we have the SRAS shifting, okay, to the left. Now, remember your SRAS, that means your short run aggregate supply curve, is largely determined by the cost of production, okay, the cost of producing things. Now, this could be, the cost components could be wages or resource price like oil, steel, okay? That could change your cost of production and therefore shift your SRAS. Now, take note, cost of production and SRAS, the relationship is inverse. When it becomes more costly to produce, like here, the cost of production goes up, it becomes more expensive to produce, you can only produce less, because you can no longer afford to produce as much as before, and vice versa. Okay, so you can see these two are inversely related. Okay, costs of production and SRAS are inversely related. Now, so what happens when SRAS falls? Now, in this diagram, we also begin from full employment output, where originally all the lines meet together. Now, take note, the starting point may not be this equilibrium level all the time. Okay, it could be above or below. Okay, now we are just using an example and assume that we are starting at full employment output. Okay, it may not be here all the time, so read the question carefully. Okay, you can see your SRAS falling, shifting to the left. Left is less, right is more. So shifting to the left means it's falling. Okay, now so the SRAS shift to the left because your cost of production is rising. Okay, so it becomes more expensive to produce, so you can only afford to produce less. So SRAS shift to the left. So from the original equilibrium point, you are now here. Now at the new equilibrium point, you have a new set of coordinates. You have a new production level at Y1 and a new price level at P1. Okay, observe what happens. At Y1, you are now producing less than your potential. Okay, you're now producing less than your potential. So there's now a gap. This is called a recessionary gap. I mentioned earlier, when you're producing less than your potential, is not something that's good. All right, so there should be a recession that's happening in the economy. So we call this a recessionary gap. All right, so prices, on the other hand, has also gone up. Okay, because your SRAS has shifted to the left. All right. Now, in the coming tutorial, there will be a lot of examples and a lot of practice with shifting of the curves. All right. Please practice well at it, as this is an important cornerstone of your macroeconomics learning. All right. See you guys in tutorial and for lecture next week. Bye.